did a survey with 1,000 companies that are deploying AI to get a sense for where they are and what's working, what's not working, what's the status of AI adoption. And so what was interesting? So a few things. First one is, regardless how we cut the data, we get to that only 4 to 5% of the companies are actually able to deploy AI at scale and at pace at which the new technologies are coming at us. So the second one is those that are in that first bucket have on average 1.5 to 2 times higher growth rates than those that are not. And the return on invested capital is also 1.5 to 2 times higher than the laggards. So it's paying off to be the leader in deploying AI at scale. Maybe a bad analogy is like, hey, I'll wait to start playing the sport until the Olympics start. Well, it's kind of too late. It took a decade for people to get ready for them. You can't just wait for the Olympics to start running, right? There's a lot of prep that needs to happen before you can actually perform on the stage, right?
Welcome to the new automation mindset, where AI, automation, and integration come together. I'm your host, Marcus Zirn, and as Chief Strategy Officer and part of the founding executive team at Workato, it is my mission to find these top innovators in AI, automation, and integration and share their journeys with all of you. So today, I have with me Vlad Lukic. He's managing director and a senior partner at BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, and he's been there for a long time, 18 years. So, to probably say that Vlad has his share of digital transformation and AI project experiences is probably an understatement. I mean, we're very lucky to have him with us today and then learn from all that 18 years of experience. And it's great timing to talk, because I just noticed just this week, BCG released this brand new report, Where's the Value in AI? And we'll link to that report in the comments, of course. Vlad is a co-author. And so maybe to kick this off, just wanted to start there, talk about this brand new report, Where's the Value in AI? Vlad, can you give us a quick summary of the BCG findings? It's of course a hot topic for all of us.
Yeah, well, first of all, great to see you, Marcus, and looking forward to the conversation. I'm sure I'm going to learn as much in the conversation. So we just finished a report. We have a lot of experience by doing the projects, but many times you gotta trust us at our word when we say things. So we said, why don't we step back and do a proper research? So we did a survey with 1,000 companies that are deploying AI to get a sense for where they are and what's working, what's not working, what's the status of AI adoption. And so what was interesting? So a few things. First one is, regardless how we cut the data, we get to that only 4 to 5% of the companies are actually able to deploy AI at scale and at pace at which the new technologies are coming at us. So that's only 4 to 5% out of the total universe, right? And so that's on one end pretty depressive. On the other hand, it also is showing how big of a gap there is between those that are leaning in and those that are falling behind, and it's widening. So that's kind of one observation. The second one is those that are in that first bucket have on average 1.5 to 2 times higher growth rates than those that are not the leaders. And they have the return on invested capital is also 1.5 to 2 times higher than the laggards. So it's paying off to be the leader in deploying AI at scale. So that's kind of one set of observations. The second one is when we look at the winners, so then it starts begging questions. So what are the winners doing, right? When we look at the winners, there are 3 things they're doing differently and unique. First one is they're focused on their core workflows. So they don't go just for the support functions and say we're going to automate or introduce Gen AI as a co-pilot or an aid or an agent in some of the support functions to squeeze a little bit of efficiency. No, they're actually going with a mindset of like, what are the core workflows that are giving us competitive edge and advantage? And they're doubling down on those because the value is actually much higher if they get those right. So if you're a software company, that means you're going into code writing. If you're a biopharma company, you're going into R&D. If you're an insurance company, you're going into the underwriting workflows, right? So that's one thing we're seeing the leaders do really well. The second one is they are disproportionately spending time on the operating model of deploying this technology versus just the data science and the data engineering of accessing the data and putting it into the tools. Because what we're seeing over and over is that to get the benefit from this, you need to rethink the whole workflow end to end, right? And deploy the technology where it matters. And sometimes you got to change incentives of your employees that are doing specific tasks. Sometimes you need to change the frequency of the meetings. And the leaders are really good at figuring that out and then tackling it, right, head on. And then the third thing that they do really well that came out loud and clear is they focus on fewer use cases, but they go deeper and more persistently. So specifically, we found that laggards have 6 to 7 use cases per workflow on average, and the leaders have only 3. But they go much deeper, they spend more money on them, and they stick with them longer until they see the results. And the vocabulary they use also is not so much use cases as much as end-to-end workflows and outcomes. And so you just see it in their motion as they deploy the technology. So those are some of the highlights from the report, which was both fun to do and also, compile and reflect on. I don't know if these resonate, Marcus, with you, with what you're seeing as well.
No, I kind of it makes me think. It does resonate. I do think. I mean, look, at Workato, obviously we believe we're around orchestrating around business processes to kind of see that AI matters, but AI matters more or is more valuable when it's like really embedded into a business process, or when you think about that. That workflow, that business process. I mean, I can totally relate to that. That it matters more if it's a core business process. I think that makes sense.
And stakes are higher. It's more relevant, right? It raises the bar of like relevance as well, right? So if therefore people really sweat how to make it work.
Yeah. And I think that one thing that we'll get into that more in detail later is that it does take work, right? That it's not like immediate. It's not like you turn something on and it's going to be amazing. I mean, it takes effort, it takes work, it takes focus, it seems like, is what the report also says to make this right. We at Workato, we released in summer this agentic framework. So it's a little bit, I mean, this term agent is all the hype, but really I'm thinking about, how do you marry an LLM? How do you marry generative AI and the business process together? And so I'm thinking about these agents almost like, I don't know, digital employees, if you want, like, and they do certain tasks and then they might actually interoperate with other digital agents and so on. So I'm obviously very curious what you see in agent projects out there, AI agent projects out there, or maybe even if you don't think of this as an agent, but really kind of a deep embedding of the generative AI into the business processes. What any anecdotes, any kind of success stories, or anything that you've seen where people really get the most value out of it?
Yeah. So listen, I in one of the posts coming out of a number of meetings, I jokingly said, I think year 2025 will be the year of agents. It just feels like a natural progression of where we are, because when we deploy some of the Gen AI customer-facing apps, right, that give you access to the underlying LLMs, when you observe the folks using them, it usually involves few steps where they need to step out of that workflow and then go and pull in some data from another system. Or once they have an output, they got to put it into something else. There's a lot of steps where they kind of get outside of the workflow. And then when you observe them, like big chunk of those steps are things that, boy, if I just hit a button to press go and it just did it, like it's doable because it's fairly repetitive and detailed work that requires accuracy. And with humans doing it, there is a human error that kicks in. Even if you're copy pasting, I was just looking at something where the rate of mistakes when people do copy paste, they don't see a paragraph at the end of it, or they miss a comma or a dot at the end, and it totally changes the meaning. There's always human error in all of those steps, right? And so agents can play a wonderful role there, where if you observe and monitor the humans, we can automate subparts of the total task and then create the right interventions for the human judgment to interpret and allow it to move to the next step. So minimizes human error, but gets the human judgment in the workflow while benefiting from automation of some tasks that take literally shifting from window to window, right, on the user interface. And that's kind of, I see that's a natural progression of the usage of the LLMs right now in the next step now. And then within that, it allows us to scale up some of these things, right? So especially when you get into some of the back office applications and call center environments, I can scale up business much faster if I now don't need to go and hire 1,000 employees, right? But I can actually deploy agents, and I maybe need only 100 employees that are now managing these agents and fine-tuning them and evolving them, right? So like those are a few examples, Marcus, and I just see it as a natural progression of what we have right now at our fingertips.
Yeah. No, that's good to hear. Yeah, I'm thinking almost like, there is a certain number of processes that used to be like fairly easy to automate. I mean, if you think about like using RPA and so on, like really back office kind of fairly high volume, low complexity kind of step-by-step kind of stuff. It feels to me like with the LLMs, with the new agents, there's a new class, a new universe of processes now that we couldn't address before that now we can. When the most obvious that we see a lot is when emails come in, all kind of support. I mean, might be emails, might be other way, but like some kind of a text comes in, you have to respond to it. It's just that it almost was a way that because someone had to read those emails, it basically made it impossible to do straight through processing.
Yeah, and even with RPA, it needed to be pre-qualified or tagged specific way or formatted so it can enter that workflow. Now it can come much more unstructured and much more all over the place, if you will, and we can ingest it and direct it where it needs to go, right? So I do think that some of those hybrid motions are going to be the next wave, which LLMs are enabling.
And we would agree. I think we see this actually all over the place. And it's actually interesting how, I know it requires focus and there's still a lot to get right, but it actually is relatively straightforward to get some of them. Sometimes it surprises me, like what you can accomplish there. I mean, you mentioned that you probably still want a human validation step, but still, yes. Doing that pre-qualification kind of just saves a lot of time.
Correct. And the trick for the companies is to figure out, can they extract the value from that? So I'll give you an example. We have a client where we took one step that took 10 days of document preparation because I need to go into one system, pull it in. That's one document. Then another document is coming from a different source, end up with 3 documents. And then a fourth person needs to compile these into a new document that then gets to the review committee that approves or not that draft. So think about if you're in a bank credit approval process that would have stuff like that, or if you're in a insurance company and either an underwriting process or claims processing. The car got in an accident and I need to compile the images, the text, the descriptions. I need to compile the policy. I need to compile the initial assessment. All of that comes into a new document, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the end of it gets reviewed by someone to be approved. And I literally have hundreds of different processes across industries that go through the same kind of logical sequence that ends up with some sort of approval. Now imagine you take those 10 days and you condense it literally into 1 or 2 minutes, right? Because like you can execute a lot of those workflows and you have the initial draft ready. Yet the final outcome still takes 10 days. And then you are like, ask yourself, what's the reason? Well, the reason is the team that reviews it still meets only once every 10 days. And so now the question is for the company, well, why can't you get the team to meet more frequently to approve these things? And the answer is many times, well, they're busy with other things, and this is always how it was. So it would actually be disruptive if we get them to meet more frequently. Then you ask the question, well, why were they meeting in the first place? Well, because the accuracy of the documents coming their way was only 40-50%. So a lot of it was needed to actually send it back. Great. What is the current accuracy of these models that are coming now from these tools? Oh, actually 90-95%. Interesting. Do we even need that team in the first place? Right? And so those are now the operating model choices that like a lot of companies could even deploy some of the solutions like Workato and others to help automate a lot of or string together these things into agents and make them faster. But if they don't change the underlying operating model and change the incentives around it, it doesn't get deployed, right? So it's interesting to your point that you made earlier. Some of it feels so surprising to how easy it is to do some of these things, yet the deployment is not there. And most of the time it is the issue on they didn't rethink the end-to-end workflow, right? And they don't want to make the hard managerial decisions to do things in a different way, and therefore this stuff gets stuck.
It's interesting. So you just moved the bottleneck from one
Correct.
to the next one, and
Correct.
you didn't kind of improve the end-to-end.
Yes.
that makes total sense. Now listen, Vlad. So I was 2 weeks ago. I was at this big Gartner symposium in Orlando. And, obviously everyone talks about AI, and the one storyline was always the same. I think in every single presentation, it was always about, the AI, generative AI, and then your data. And the fact that, if you don't have good data in the company, if the data is not in shape, then the Gen AI or the AI projects are maybe not as impactful as they can. Are you seeing that out there in the real world? I mean, is quality and accessibility of data, is that a problem?
Yeah.
Is that becoming even a bigger problem?
Well, listen, it was always the problem. This is helping surface some of those issues. I'll just to make it come to life. We just built Copilot for service technicians in the field that go and provide. They maintain, service, fix, support really heavy equipment and complex equipment that some of it is 25, 30 years old, right? And some of the manufacturers of that equipment are not around anymore. So all they have going on is a 30-year-old manual in French or in German deployed somewhere in Midwest in the US, and they have 5 technicians that know how to maintain that equipment. So that are in their 60s. And so if the technicians retire and the new technicians are not ramped up, they're quite exposed, right? And who's going to go and maintain this equipment? So we build copilots, right, using Gen AI to ingest all of these manuals in different languages, which automatically they're then translated. You can have a chat, it gives instructions. So we deploy it in the field and have the technicians use it. And the first wave of responses is like, this AI stuff is garbage. It doesn't work. Look at the silly things it's suggesting we do. So we're not going to use this. So we then, as good engineers, went back and said, what's the source that's feeding this? We looked at the manuals. We say, but this is exactly the instructions from the manual, step by step. Like, guys, what's wrong? They're like, oh, which manuals did you use? So we share the manuals, and they say, oh, those manuals were always wrong. We never used them. Really? For 30 years? They're like, yep, they were like... So how does one learn? Well, they follow us and shadow us, and we learn how to do these things. Okay, great. So the underlying data was wrong. The manuals that should be correct. So now we are recreating the manuals so we can feed the correct data in there. And the trick then, this was such a wonderful experience because it's like it mimics so many things that we see. People say that this AI thing is wrong. Well, what was the data that you used? Oh, well, this data is wrong. Okay, but let's fix it, right? And so it's manageable, but it all comes back to that garbage in, garbage out, right? And building a muscle to do, now it's exposing a lot of those gaps. This was an example where for 30 years the data was wrong, but no one was using it. Now it's actually helpful. It's forcing the right conversations. We're going to fix it, and it's going to be there. So it's just a new muscle that companies need to build. I don't know if that example resonates.
Oh, totally resonates. Like, I was part of, actually in my first job consulting, early 90s, where we got a knowledge management system and stored. It was basically like a better Google search for documents. But when the data was properly structured, it was super helpful. And if it's not, then it's not. I think the whole Gen AI will totally drive people to maybe also write the documentations differently and better.
Yeah, I love it. I find it as a wonderful catalyst to do the right things, right? And do the hygiene better. We have examples where Oh, well, of course we have all this data. Here you go. And then we find out that they, in the database where they're collecting it, took off the decimal points and the milliseconds that follow. And all the data around that specific thing we're looking at requires that level of fidelity. And then the answer is like, initially they thought they had 5 years of data. In reality, they had 0, because the database that was storing the data was never collecting at the level of granularity that was needed. So this becomes a wonderful catalyst to actually go and fix a lot of those things that are in the data hygiene, data governance type of topics that are not the sexiest topics, but this also links them into core workflows if you do it well, and they become interesting topics because you actually see the difference that if you do it well, it's going to have.
Yeah, we have this one example, which is, I think it's really eye-opening. So think about technical support, software support. And so we were building these RAG supported LLM, AI search. And we fed all the tickets, all the support tickets in there. And just like what you kind of told the story, it wasn't very good. It actually didn't work out well. And so we also were kind of discovering, kind of looking for it. And it turns out that basically the tickets were individual tickets. There were sometimes like 4 or 5 tickets over a longer period that were actually related to one problem case. But in the data, how it was fed in, that connection wasn't apparent for the LLM. And so they were looked at separately. And so the solution wasn't very good. And so in the second approach, and this is interesting, just to try to show the difference, we actually used a super standard text search for the support, but then we used the AI to actually go through the tickets, kind of identify the correlation and summarize the tickets, the multiple tickets into one solution. That used AI used to do the summarization, and then feeding into a normal text search was actually much better than using fancy AI search on the wrong data, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. And it's interesting linking it to the agent conversations as well. There is a lot of, some of the more advanced applications of this are, hey, we got to rewrite a lot of the mainframe code for the cloud native type of application. So let's understand the logic of the existing code, because there's no documentation and people that were involved with it are not around anymore. So how do I understand the logic of something written in COBOL, right, that I don't have specs for? So we build an agent that engages with the website or something that manifests that workflow to digest different use cases and say, okay, this is what it's trying to do. Then we have a bot that is, or agent that we build that is reviewing the code itself to try to compare the linkages. Then we have a bot that is pulling them together, right? And everything I just described might sound complex, but at the end of it, a sequence of those different Gen AIs applied on the code and the current experience gives me documentation for, we think that the user story is the following, and the code that should adjoin it is the following. And the rewriting of the code then becomes much easier than someone trying to guess a lot of those connecting dots, right? So those are kind of the things where AI is actually helpful to digest and understand the current data. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not just the AI itself. There's no one size fits it all. You have to apply it in a smart way. So actually talk to me about this. I'm actually really curious because, at Workato, the people who use Workato, they seem to be on the integration people, they maybe process people, right? The whole world of data, the AI, that was typically actually handled in a completely separate organization. Data scientists worked on the data, process people worked on the process, and somehow the two not that often kind of work directly together. And now we get this Gen AI, and your report says, hey, you got to embed it. You have to get this into the process. So the question now is, do all the process people need to learn a lot about more what data scientists do? Do the data scientists really have to get more of a process thinking, or how do you solve that in the field? Like, how do you get these different skill sets merged up together?
Yeah, it's interesting. Listen, it very much depends on the starting point, right? Some companies, and I would argue some of the digital natives, have it as part of their DNA that like data is gold and everything we put in better be right the first time. So you don't even need to do massive upskilling or education of the workforce because that's just what they're doing, right? And then you have companies where they never cared about it because that's something that the data scientists and people in a black box would do, right? And you still rely on your intuition in the field to do some of the things. The starting point of these two organizations is dramatically different. And then you have all kinds of variations and flavors in between, right? And so for the companies that are kind of the way you just described, they kind of had some awareness of the data needs, right? But they chopped it up in different silos. For them, some sort of a central team that shares the use cases and the users, the stories of how the data was used and where it was a bottleneck to make the proper decision, or where it actually was a game changer in the negotiation and we had the right data to do the following thing and allowed us to close the deal faster, or because we had the data at the right moment. Let's say you're an industrial goods company that takes 3 months to kind of, once you sell something, in 3 months, you're going to deliver something on a job site, right? But because we had the data, we knew we could deliver it in a month, and we used it in negotiations, and we were so much more aggressive than anyone else. We won the deal, and we actually delivered it because we had the data that told us that we have available components and the trucks are available and we could deliver it right now. Like sharing those stories with the organization to celebrate the wins, it becomes such an imperative and important step, which goes all the way to the CEO to do it, to show the importance. And then that creates the culture of the data hygiene and awareness of how to use the data. At that moment, the data governance team and the process team have the license to give instructions to the business teams, right, on what to do, right, and how to be relevant when they're collecting the data, and how to even, do the right things, because it makes it visible, right? And again, sharing those stories and creating a regular hygiene of engagement on it becomes the trick in those situations. As obvious as it might feel, yeah?
No. I mean, look, it reminds me of, we've talked about this before, right? So there is in the software industry, we've had product managers for a long time. I've ran teams of product managers, and no one would build software without a product management team. But in IT organizations, it's sometimes still very project centric, where you do a project and it's over and you get to the next project. But it seems to me, from everything that you just said, and also what the report I think found was, you're not going to get it right the first time. You probably have to iterate a little bit. It seems like that product manager role that sits with a certain capability, or process capability, for a little longer time, and really gets into the domain, understands the process, understands the data, and so on, probably becomes even more important than it ever was before. Would you agree? I mean, do you see that?
Agree.
That
yeah.
Product management of like a IT product manager or process product manager, process manager kind of role, that almost like it's like, if you want to get the benefits out of Gen AI, you got to have it as an IT organization.
Yes. Now I'm seeing, so absolutely, Marcus, and I'm seeing a huge spike in demand from companies to help them think through it, right? And with the question also, where should it sit? Should it sit in IT or should it sit in businesses? And then again, it depends on the starting point of the company. And I'm seeing it effectively deployed either in the IT organization as a layer that interacts with the businesses, or within businesses with enough tech forward folks that know how to write specs and interact with the IT team. It's interesting. It can come from different things. Like there are companies that have, what some of my colleagues call citizen developers, right? Folks that just know enough about the workflow and they're tech savvy, and they start pulling these things together. They create a bit of a following and they start deploying these things effectively, and suddenly it's like, oh, this is awesome. Others should do the same thing, right? Few organizations know how to celebrate that and build off of that momentum, but that is one way one can start. The other one is a lot of the companies were on the agile motion for a number of years, where they developed these agile coaches that knew how to manage these cross-functional teams, where really good agile coaches evolved into being some of these product owners that not just know how to run the process, but know how to understand the workflow, activate the right team. And then it's more a squad that is not one person, but a number of them from the business and from the tech, that with the right coach and the orchestrator can articulate the right specs and then build it. So it's kind of second area where I see it emerging from. The third one is more advanced IT organizations that say we're going to hire a number of MBA or process folks into the tech organization to write us the right specs and be the liaison with the business. And to your point, not do it as a one-time project, but actually own this workflow and be the owner of it. It's pick pricing, right? This is going to be the business owner for pricing, and he or she is going to be working with the tech team to build a pipeline of the tech interventions, right? Or tools to infuse into that process. And they have the license to engage with the business process owner to rethink the workflow end to end, right? So I'm seeing that's a third archetype of how some of these are emerging, but I'm seeing an increase of awareness, to your point, right? And more companies trying to build that muscle. And like what I see in digital natives, right? That's what the executives do. They are that, right? So when we take the known examples out there, like pick your favorite tech CEO out there that is a known figure out there, without me naming any of them, you all have your favorite. He or she's playing that role of the product owner because they know enough on the tech side. They know the user outcome they want to have, and they just push those specs on the team, right? And so imagine now in a good organization, 100 of those being that linkage between the business process and the tech side that are doing this on an ongoing basis. And the good companies are very organically building those teams and capabilities.
Really interesting. Do you see correlation there in the AI report and the value of AI report about kind of how an IT organization is structured and the value they get from AI? It seems to me, for example, like someone who has really heavily relied on outsourcing IT, it seems like they're probably going to have a harder time, maybe.
It's harder time because they've lost the muscle, right, to do that, right? And so I have a number of clients that have gotten to a point where 80 to 90, I have one that's at 95% of their workforce is on the IT is outsourced. Like they literally don't have a muscle to do that, right? And so the question is, again, for each company, the answer is different. How much of this should be in-house versus outsourced, right? Once you answer that question, how do you build enough of a muscle for folks to do this? I also have examples where a company that has 1,000 folks in the IT department has only 50 that are full-time employees. Everyone else is outsourced, but of those 50, 40 are these product owners, right? That are actually, they know how to write specs and they know how to manage third parties. So it works really well. So there is no magic number of you must be all in-house or all outsourced, but you need to solve the ones that are deploying at that 4% of the companies that are really deploying at scale. They have figured out this operating model and they have the right balance of people that are the product owners that know how to spec the requirements. They also are senior enough in the organization to own the workflow and have the license to change it and run the interventions, right? So they have the license to rethink it, and they also know how to engage the tech team to deploy it, and they're measured off of that. Yeah. So the combo of all of those things is what we see the advanced players have in place.
Interesting. So Vlad, if you look at this kind of like, we talked about this pioneering world of doing AI and so on. But if you take it a step backwards, just think of good old digital transformation. Any IT capability for the business. Maybe it be a company that does a lot of acquisitions and then need to integrate them, or maybe there's a big application transformation or something. Anything that you feel that this new world working with AI is actually benefiting also the traditional projects, or any learnings just from larger IT projects overall? It seems to me like the Gen AI is pushing some of these buttons that I think we knew around the product managers and about that the process matters and so on. Maybe also that interface between IT and the operations, the business teams, and how this is so important. But where do you see things going? Or just curious, any anecdotes of like successful transformations or not so successful transformations?
Yeah, you framed it in a nice way. I'm seeing Gen AI over the last 2 years like just being this trigger or a catalyst to put a lot of these perennial and constant topics visibly on the table, because the CEOs would say, well, I just want to use this thing and say, here's the data, go forecast, right? And then, because I've seen it on TV, right, or in the presentation by one of the players, and you're like, that's great, but you can't do it. Why can't I do it? Well, because your data is bad. Okay, fix it. Okay, well, it's going to require this, this, and this. Okay, well, even if you have that, you don't really have someone that will spec the right workflow and the problem statement. Okay, well, fix it. What do I need? Well, I need the product owners that know how to have. Okay, fine, fixed. Okay, well, even if you have that, if they don't have the license to change the incentives and they don't think end-to-end workflow, you're not going to see the results. Okay, go fix it. Great. Okay, well, even if you have that in place, if you don't know how to measure the outcome of this, like in the example that I shared earlier, technically we now do something in minutes that took us 10 days, but it's still 10 days for an outcome. So is it successful? Yes, for the tech team, but not for the organization. So which one should I use to evaluate was this success or not? So if you don't learn how to do that, again, it's not going to work. So all the somewhat obvious and perennial topics are all coming to the table, and Gen AI was a catalyst to put them back on the table. But in a different way now, because people are not saying, okay, because it's so hard, it's going to be hard for others, so let's move on. They're actually seeing folks deploying it, and they're saying, well, now I got to fix it. So help me build a roadmap of how do I institutionalize building of this muscle and make it part of my DNA, versus it's a one-time project of a large ERP system or a large CRM solution, and then we're done with this tech stuff for a while. They're seeing it's constantly feeding into what they're doing. So it catalyzed the conversations on a lot of topics that have been there for a while, right? And like veterans of the industry like yourself are like probably rolling their eyes like, okay, well, we've been talking about this for 20 years. Like, guys, nothing has changed here. And what has changed, people are now seeing that if you do it well, how the magic comes together because they have it at their fingertips, right? And they're seeing that if they don't lean in, the gap is just becoming too big for them to catch up. So again, it's more a catalyst, not necessarily that it put a bunch of new muscles to be built. It's speeding up and surfacing what needs to be done.
But it also seems to me like, I had one person tell me the other day, IT leader, he said like, Marcus, with this whole AI thing, I'll just wait for the applications to just embed it in there. They'll get it right, and let me just wait, and so I don't make any mistakes, and then we'll adopt it that way. It seems to me like your report is actually almost saying the opposite, right? It says like, or everything we talked about actually in our conversation here, it says like, well, that's maybe not the right way to think about it.
Listen, it is the right question to be put on the table, and a lot of the tech leaders should be asking that question. And then let me give you an example of how it played out. So I have few clients that over the last 12 to 18 months went and built some of the solutions that are now features in software. Pick your favorite software vendor out there. And the clients have built a workflow, right? And a solution that is now a feature in that software package. And so they would say like, why did we even spend money and time on this? Because look, it's a feature now. Well, even stick with that example that I gave of something taking 10 days to be created and now it's in minutes. Even if you wait for the software package to release that as a feature, you still have the problem that the team that reviews the output meets once every 10 days. And to tackle that issue, you take 3 to 6 months of conversations, right? Or like take the example of that technician copilot that I mentioned where we realized that the underlying manual was an issue. If this is now a feature in one of the software tools for dispatching that people use, they're still going to realize that the underlying data was the problem and they'll need to fix that. So all of those infrastructure and operating model topics are 12 to 18-month topics. So if you now wait for the software package to release it, you're still left with 12 months plus of fine-tuning the operating model to start using it. So you've lost 12 months up to that point. You've now lost another 12 months. So that's 2 years before you've deployed it, versus someone who roughed a bit through it to start deploying it, spent 12 months, kind of got it to work, but now they got it in a software package. They're just deploying it like this. So they have a year ahead of you, because some of this hard work just is required. You cannot skip those steps, right? So I would, I'm not sure I would apply it on every single use case out there the way I described, but you should look at the full portfolio and then selectively pick ones that you know are going to be hardest operationally to pull off, with kind of these examples that I gave behind in the back of your mind, and then deliberately decide where do you wait for software packages versus where do you need to build the muscle. Like chatbot is another interesting example. There was that public example, I think it was Chevrolet, where someone negotiated with a chatbot to get for $1 a car, right? Well, okay, that's going to happen in an off-the-shelf solution, but what's the responsible AI team that reviews this? What is the legal team that now follows up on this? How do we stop it? How do we intervene? Like, all those muscles require months of prep to be ready. So I'd rather start working on those things while the software vendors are going to be releasing the new features all the time.
And it seems to me like everyone, the way you talked it through, that if you do exercise the muscle on the right focused initiatives, and then you actually will have improved your data in the process. You probably will have built, a new product manager role into your IT organization, and so you will have done a lot of things that will actually make the regular work better.
Correct.
Also, right?
Correct.
So it's probably in contrast, if you just wait for the vendor to release it, you will basically just rely on that. You might still be in this old outsourcing mindset, and you will take you even longer to respond.
Yeah, and maybe a bad analogy is like, hey, I'll wait for the Olympics to start playing the sport until the Olympics start. Well, it's kind of too late. It took like 4 years or a decade for people to get ready for them. You can't just wait for the Olympics to start running, right? There's a lot of prep that needs to happen before you can actually perform on the stage, right? So it's a little bit, it's not perfect analogy, but there's something to it of like, just get started with the basics of making sure that your plumbing is in place, that the data governance is in place, that you know how to change workflows around the technology when it kicks in, right? Just build the muscle to do those things, and also make it be something that's regularly deployed versus, oh, we'll just have a big release of blah once every 18 months. And then we all stop working for a week and we are all just deploying it and training, versus something that you're digesting on a regular basis. And that just takes prep, and there's like, you just got to start on it, right? There is no time to wait on that.
Yeah, perfect. Well, listen, Vlad, this was great. Thank you so much for spending this time. The whole Gen AI world is evolving so quickly. Probably if we talk again in like 6 months, we'll have a whole new conversation, whole new learnings. I think that's what makes it fascinating. But I think you helped me. I really do think you helped a lot of people in the audience just think through what it really means. So we will link again the report, the BCG report. What's the value in AI? We will link it in the comments, and then hope all of the audience will get started with their focused AI project and kind of put the muscle behind it, and put also the patience and effort and so behind it to make it work. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, and thank you and the team at Workato for pushing us and making sure we are stepping heavily into this new AI age. So thank you.
Thank you, Vlad. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. Please make sure to rate today's episode, leave us a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the show so you will never miss an episode. I'll see you next time.